You're being dramatic. The nurse scoffed as the woman writhed in pain, clutching her belly. Her husband, standing quietly at her side, tightened his jaw, but said nothing. The woman, in the middle of active labor, struggled to keep her composure. Instead of offering compassion, the nurse rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed. What the nurse didn't realize was that this wasn't just any couple. The man standing next to the laboring woman wasn't just a concerned husband. He was the man who ran the entire hospital. And while he stayed silent for now, his sharp gaze didn't miss a thing. As the tension in the room thickened, a question lingered. How far could someone go before they crossed the line, especially when they didn't know who they were dealing with? This was about to get personal. The nurse's dismissive attitude wasn't new. She was known for being blunt, often brushing off patients' concerns as exaggerations. To her, this was just another routine shift, another laboring mother making a fuss. But to the husband, it was personal. He had spent years building the hospital's reputation, ensuring that every patient received care and respect. Yet here he was, watching his wife endure not just the agony of childbirth, but the sting of indifference. The woman gasped as another contraction gripped her, and the nurse barely glanced up from her clipboard. "You'll be fine," she muttered, dismissing the intensity of the moment. The husband's silence spoke volumes. He was calculating, observing. What would happen when this nurse realized the man in the room wasn't just another face, but the one who signed her paycheck? The tension in the room grew heavier with every passing minute. The nurse, oblivious to the mounting storm, continued her tasks with the same dismissive attitude. She smirked as the woman let out another cry of pain. "This is normal. If you can't handle it, maybe you should have thought twice before having a baby," she said under her breath. The words cut through the air like a knife, and the husband's hand tightened around his wife's. What the nurse didn't see was the flicker of determination in the woman's eyes. Despite her pain, she knew her husband's quiet demeanor was never a sign of weakness. He was watching, waiting, and planning. Across the hall, whispers of his presence had already begun. Staff who recognized him were nervous, exchanging worried glances. How long would it take for the truth to unfold? The woman's cries became sharper, each contraction hitting harder than the last. The nurse sighed, clearly annoyed, and muttered something about overreacting. She barely glanced at the monitor, her focus elsewhere. But the husband's piercing gaze never left her, his expression calm yet full of unspoken intensity. Outside the room, a quiet ripple of activity began. A junior doctor walked by, hesitated, and did a double take when he noticed the man. His eyes widened in recognition. Moments later, a senior nurse hurried down the hallway, whispering urgently to another staff member. The news spread quickly. The hospital director was in the labor ward. And not just for an inspection, his wife was a patient. Inside, the nurse remained blissfully unaware. But with every passing second, the air thickened. The moment of reckoning was coming, and she had no idea it was already at the door. Just as the nurse prepared to leave the room, brushing off the woman's cries yet again, the door swung open. A senior doctor stepped in, his demeanor urgent and professional. He glanced briefly at the laboring woman, then locked eyes with her husband. The subtle nod exchanged between them wasn't lost on the nurse, who frowned in confusion. "Is there an issue?" the nurse asked, her tone laced with irritation. The doctor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the monitors, carefully assessing the readings the nurse had neglected for the past several minutes. His expression darkened. "This patient is in distress," he said sharply, his voice cutting through the tension. The nurse bristled, defensive. "I've been monitoring her. It's nothing unusual." But she stopped mid-sentence as the husband finally spoke, his voice calm yet commanding. Then why does it look like you've been ignoring her? The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavily. Before the nurse could respond, another contraction hit, and the woman gasped in pain. The husband leaned in close to his wife, whispering reassurances, but his eyes never left the nurse. And then the twist no one saw coming. A quiet knock at the door revealed the hospital's chief of staff. The nurse froze, realizing too late that this wasn't just any ordinary family drama. The stakes had just been raised, and the reckoning was only beginning. The chief of staff stepped into the room, his face a mix of concern and authority. The nurse's confidence visibly crumbled as realization dawned. She glanced nervously at the husband, piecing together what she should have noticed hours ago. This wasn't just any man. This was the hospital's director. And now her every word, her every dismissive action was under scrutiny. The chief of staff turned to the doctor, who quickly explained the situation. "The patient has been in distress, and it was overlooked," he said, his tone sharp. The nurse stammered, trying to justify her actions, but the director raised a hand to silence her. "Enough," he said, his voice calm yet final. He turned to his wife, taking her hand. "Your care should never have been compromised. I'll make sure this never happens again." As the staff scrambled to correct their mistakes, the woman's labor progressed rapidly under the proper attention. Relief washed over her as she finally felt heard and supported. But just as the tension began to ease, the director turned to the nurse one last time. "I wasn't going to address this today," he said, his tone measured, "but we've received multiple complaints about your behavior. Consider this your final warning." The room fell silent, and the nurse's face paled. She muttered an apology before stepping aside, defeated. Moments later, the cry of a newborn filled the air, breaking the tension like sunlight after a storm. The woman smiled through her tears, her husband holding her hand tightly. But as he looked at his family, his expression softened. "This isn't just about us," he said quietly. "It's about every patient who deserves better." And with that, the real work to transform the hospital began. As the mother cradled her newborn, peace finally settled over the room. The chaos and tension that had filled the day seemed like a distant memory. The father looked at his wife and child, a quiet determination in his eyes. He wasn't just a hospital director anymore. This was personal. He vowed to ensure that no patient would ever face neglect or indifference again. Word of the incident spread through the hospital quickly, sparking conversations among the staff. Policies were revisited, and training programs were launched to reinforce compassion and accountability. The nurse, humbled by the experience, began reflecting on her actions, realizing the true weight of her role. For the couple, this moment became more than just the birth of their child. It marked the start of meaningful change, proving that even in the hardest moments, transformation is possible.